Lock disclaimer. This story is a fictional narrative written purely for entertainment purposes. Any similarity to real-life events, names, or individuals living or dead is entirely coincidental. The story explores mature themes, including psychological tension, trust, betrayal, and emotional trauma. Reader discretion is advised. The narrative is intended to evoke suspense and emotional intensity, and is not a reflection of any real-life beliefs or events. Proceed with an open mind and be prepared for unexpected twists. It all began on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Emily was folding laundry in their modest but cozy apartment in Portland, Oregon, when her husband, Greg, walked in with a big smile on his face. He had just bumped into an old college buddy named Ryan, whom he hadn't seen in years. "He's in town for just one night," Greg said. "I invited him for dinner tonight. I thought you'd love to meet him." Emily nodded, trying to hide her unease. There wasn't anything particularly wrong about what Greg said, but something in his tone, too cheerful, too rehearsed, made her stomach churn. Still, she shrugged it off. Maybe she was just tired from work. Later that evening, Emily prepared a simple yet elegant dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a bottle of red wine they'd been saving. When the doorbell rang, Greg rushed to answer it. Standing there was Ryan, a tall, sharply dressed man with piercing blue eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. From the moment he stepped inside, Emily felt something strange about him. He was overly charming, too inquisitive about their life, asking questions that felt invasive. "So, how do you two handle disagreements? Who gets angrier first?" he asked with a smirk, twirling the wine in his glass. As the dinner progressed, Ryan's presence became increasingly unsettling. He seemed to know things he shouldn't, like where Emily's parents lived, what hospital she was born in, even the name of her childhood dog. Emily tried to maintain a polite facade, but a cold sweat formed at the back of her neck. She looked at Greg for reassurance, but he didn't seem to notice anything odd. In fact, he laughed at Ryan's offhand comments and even added details that made things worse. Emily excused herself and went to the kitchen, pretending to check on the dessert. Her hands were shaking. Something wasn't right. She could hear muffled laughter from the dining area, but it no longer sounded friendly. It felt forced, as if masking something darker beneath. When she returned, Ryan was staring at a framed photo of their wedding, his fingers trailing slowly across the glass. "Beautiful day," he said softly, but the way he said it made Emily's skin crawl. That night, after Ryan finally left, Emily turned to Greg. "There's something about him," she said. But Greg brushed it off. "He's just eccentric. You're overthinking." Yet Emily couldn't sleep. The image of Ryan's smile, empty, knowing, dangerous, haunted her into the early hours of morning. A simple dinner invitation had cracked open a door, and something dark was standing just behind it, watching. The following morning, Emily woke up with a dull ache in her head and a strange sense of unease she couldn't quite shake off. As sunlight filtered through the blinds, she turned to Greg, who was already dressed and sipping coffee at the edge of the bed. "He texted me this morning," Greg said casually. "Ryan wants to meet again before he leaves town. Maybe grab lunch or something." Emily forced a smile, pretending to be okay with it, but something inside her twisted. She had dreamt of Ryan the night before, only it wasn't really a dream. It felt more like a memory of something she couldn't explain. In the dream, he was standing at the foot of their bed, staring at her, smiling with a face that didn't quite look human. She shook the thought out of her head and went about her day, but little things kept gnawing at her. Her phone had dozens of missed calls from unknown numbers, all from the same area code Ryan mentioned he was staying in. Her laptop camera light flickered randomly when she wasn't using it. At the grocery store, a woman bumped into her and whispered, "Be careful who you welcome into your home," before disappearing down another aisle. Emily started to feel like she was losing her mind. That evening, she confronted Greg. "What do you really know about Ryan?" she asked, watching his reaction closely. He hesitated just for a second, but it was long enough for her to notice. "I told you," he said. "College friend. We shared a dorm for a year." That's it. But Emily remembered something odd from the night before. Ryan had mentioned a cabin trip she and Greg went on during their honeymoon. A trip Greg swore he never told anyone about. Later, while Greg was taking a shower, Emily snooped through his phone. There were messages between him and Ryan, but what alarmed her was the tone. They weren't casual. They were detailed, specific, disturbing. One message from Ryan read, "She's not ready yet, but she will be, just like the others." Another said, "Dinner was a success. The house feels right? Emily's blood ran cold. Just like the others? What did that mean? Who were the others? Was Greg in on something? Suddenly, the water in the bathroom shut off. Greg was quiet. Too quiet. Emily panicked and quickly put the phone back, pretending she was doing laundry. But when Greg stepped out of the bathroom, there was a look in his eyes she had never seen before. Blank. Like a puppet waiting for instructions. And then he smiled. It was a smile that didn't belong to Greg. Not fully. Not anymore. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that whatever had started the night Ryan walked in, it wasn't over. It had just begun. The days that followed turned into a blur of confusion and fear. Emily no longer recognized the man she had married. Greg, once kind and affectionate, had grown distant and mechanical. He smiled at all the right times, said all the right things, but it was like watching a stranger wear her husband's skin. Every morning, she would wake up hoping she had imagined it all, only to find Greg already up, dressed, and silently watching her as she opened her eyes, just sitting there. Staring. Smiling. She tried convincing herself it was stress, maybe even paranoia. She hadn't slept properly in days, and the strange occurrences only intensified. Doors she remembered locking were found open. Their cat, Murphy, who usually slept at the foot of the bed, had disappeared. Greg said it must have run away, but Emily found tufts of fur near the basement door and a small crimson smear on the floorboards. She tried to confront him about it, but he laughed it off. "You're being dramatic," he said, brushing her cheek with the back of his hand, cold, detached, unfamiliar. In a desperate attempt to gain clarity, Emily reached out to Greg's old college classmates on social media. After hours of scrolling and messaging, one of them finally replied, "Greg never had a roommate named Ryan. He lived alone." That one message shattered the last thread of safety Emily was clinging to. If Ryan wasn't Greg's college friend, then who or what was he? Later that night, Emily found Greg in the living room, whispering on the phone. He didn't hear her approach. She hid behind the door and listened. "She's starting to crack. But not enough yet. Give me 2 more nights." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled backward, knocking over a vase. Greg snapped his head around, eyes wide, but again that expressionless smile returned in an instant. "Hey babe," he said smoothly, as if nothing had happened. She pretended not to have heard anything. Played along. Smiled back. But inside she was screaming. That night, when Greg was asleep, Emily crept into the basement. It was a place she had rarely visited. Greg had always handled storage and repairs. The air was stale, and the bulb flickered as she descended. What she saw made her knees buckle. Photographs. Dozens of them. Women's faces. Smiling, scared, some with red circles drawn around their eyes or mouths. A few looked like they had been taken without the women knowing. And in the center of the table, a photo of her. Emily. Freshly printed. The date scribbled on the back was yesterday. Underneath that picture was a guest list. All crossed out except her name. She wasn't the hostess. She was the next course. Emily staggered back from the table, her breath trembling in her throat. Her mind raced as she took in every detail of the basement, the symbols scrawled in chalk on the cement walls, the wax-dripped candles that had long since burned out, and the faint smell of something rotten wafting from a locked wooden crate in the corner. Her eyes fell back on the guest list. The names were mostly women's names, some with notes beside them: unfit, too unstable, gone, accepted, and one that chilled her to the bone, replaced, fully absorbed. The sound of the floor creaking above her made Emily snap into action. She quickly turned off the dim light bulb, climbed the stairs silently, and eased the basement door shut, careful not to let it click. She raced back to the bedroom and dove under the covers just as Greg walked in, half-naked and drying his hands. "Bathroom sink was acting up," he said casually. "I'll take care of it tomorrow." Emily nodded, feigning a yawn. "I'm exhausted. Let's sleep." But she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying everything. The smile that wasn't Greg's. The dinner that felt staged. Ryan's cryptic comments. And now this, the basement shrine of horrors. Her entire life with Greg felt like a lie. Had he ever really loved her, or had she been handpicked for something darker? The next morning, she waited until Greg left for work before calling the police. But as soon as she mentioned his name, the tone of the officer on the other line changed. "Ma'am, are you certain about this? You're referring to Officer Gregory Simmons, right?" Emily froze. Officer? Greg wasn't a police officer, he was a freelance graphic designer, or so he claimed. "Can you confirm the address?" the voice asked. She gave it. Silence. "We'll send someone to check in," the officer finally said. But the line went dead immediately after. Emily's hands shook uncontrollably. The Greg she married didn't exist. Everything, his job, his friends, his past, was a carefully crafted illusion. She tore through their home looking for documents, IDs, anything. She found a locked drawer in Greg's study and pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside were passports, 4 of them. All with different names, but the same face, Greg's. Or whoever he really was. She couldn't breathe. Then came the knock at the door. 3 firm taps. Emily peeked through the peephole. It was Ryan. Alone. No cops. No backup. Just Ryan, smiling as if he knew she'd been waiting for him. She backed away, heart pounding in her ears, and locked the chain. The knock came again, louder. Then a voice, calm and cold, floated through the door. "You went into the basement, didn't you?" Her vision blurred. "Emily, don't make this harder than it has to be," Ryan said. She clutched the carving knife she had grabbed from the kitchen. The game was no longer dinner and smiles. It was survival. Emily's hands were slick with sweat as she gripped the carving knife tighter. The apartment, once a warm and familiar place, now felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift in the shadows sent jolts of fear down her spine. Ryan was still outside, waiting patiently as though he had all the time in the world. She backed away from the door and bolted it shut, then ran to the back of the apartment, locking all the windows and checking every exit. She knew she couldn't stay here, not when they both knew she had uncovered the truth. She ran to the bedroom and began packing a small bag, cash, her passport, phone charger, a hoodie, sneakers. But just as she zipped it up, she heard it, the front door unlocking. Not breaking down. Unlocking. She had locked it. She was certain of it. But it was opening now with a slow, deliberate click. Emily's stomach dropped. That meant one thing: Greg, or whoever he really was, had a key. Of course he did. There was no time to think. She slipped out through the bedroom window and climbed down the fire escape barefoot. Her feet scraped against the rusted metal, but she didn't stop. She dropped into the alley, hit the pavement hard, and kept running. No idea where to go, only that she had to put distance between herself and that apartment. She ran for blocks, ducking into a gas station restroom. Her phone had no service. No signal, no internet. It was as if someone had already prepared for this. Her every move had been anticipated. When she tried to use the landline phone behind the counter, the clerk just stared at her, then said in a flat voice, "They're already looking for you." She fled again. It wasn't just Ryan and Greg anymore. This was bigger. A network, maybe? A cult? A group? She didn't know. But something in her gut told her this was all orchestrated and she was the last piece in whatever game they were playing. They didn't want to kill her, not yet. No. She was part of something ceremonial. Something they were preparing her for. She made her way to an old motel on the edge of town. Cash only. No ID. She paid for one night and bolted the door, pushing the dresser in front of it. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to cry. Not quiet, soft tears, but deep, heaving sobs. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know who to trust. She only knew Greg was not Greg, and Ryan was the handler, and she was the final guest. On the motel nightstand, she noticed something that hadn't been there when she checked in. A folded note. It read, "You made it further than the others. Don't waste it." Her hands trembled. Someone out there was watching. But not all of them wanted her to lose. Emily sat frozen on the edge of the motel bed, the note still clutched in her hand. The words, "You made it further than the others. Don't waste it," echoed in her head like a whisper from the dark. Who wrote it? How did they know where she was? She hadn't told anyone. She hadn't used her phone. She hadn't even checked in under her real name. And yet someone was already one step ahead of her again, but this time it didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a warning. Maybe even a clue. Her fear was quickly replaced by adrenaline. She scanned the room for more signs, anything unusual. The curtains had a small tear, barely noticeable. When she peeked through it, she spotted a man standing outside room 109 across the parking lot. He wasn't facing her, but something about the way he stood still, focused, tense, set off an alarm in her gut. He wasn't smoking, not on a phone, not checking his watch. Just standing. Waiting. Emily crept outside her room quietly and circled around the back of the motel using the dim light from flickering lamps to stay hidden. She approached room 109 from the opposite side and ducked behind a broken vending machine. The man finally moved. He looked around cautiously, then opened his door halfway and dropped something just outside, another folded note, before stepping back inside. Emily waited until he disappeared into the shadows of his room before she darted across the lot and grabbed the paper. This one said, "He's not who you think he is. If you want answers, come inside. Now. Alone." It could be a trap. It almost certainly was. But she had nothing left to lose. Slowly, cautiously, Emily stepped into room 109. The man inside looked up from a small notebook, his face mostly hidden by a shadow cast from a single lamp. "Close the door," he said softly. She obeyed, her heart thudding in her chest. Then he looked at her fully, and Emily gasped, not because he looked familiar, but because he didn't. His face was tired, worn, filled with pain. He looked like someone who had lived through 10 lifetimes of horror. "I'm Daniel," he said. "I was married to one of the women on that list." Emily nearly collapsed into the nearest chair. "Then you know what they're doing, who they are?" Daniel nodded. "It's not just Greg. There's a group. They call themselves the Heirloom Society. They believe in an ancient ritual, a transference of will, identity, and memory. They take people, women mostly, and prepare them. Break them. Then absorb them. Not physically, but psychologically, spiritually. Piece by piece." She couldn't breathe. "Greg, he's gone," Daniel said bluntly. "What's wearing him now is something else. They've been watching you for months, maybe years. You were chosen." "Why me?" she whispered. Daniel leaned forward. "Because you're harder to break." Emily sat stiffly in the chair across from Daniel, the dusty motel air feeling heavier with every word he spoke. "The Heirloom Society doesn't just recruit," he continued. "They inhabit. They pass themselves down like heirlooms. Old souls, old power, old hunger. Every generation, they find someone new to hollow out and fill." Emily gripped the armrests, her knuckles pale. "Greg wasn't always like this," she said, almost to herself. "He was kind, sweet, protective. I don't believe he was part of this from the beginning." Daniel gave her a pained look. "Maybe not. Sometimes they target strong hosts and replace them gradually. Behavior changes. Memory gaps. Blackouts. Other times, the person you loved was never there at all. Just a vessel wearing a mask." He opened his notebook and flipped to a page covered in strange symbols. Runes, circles, mirrored letters. "This is what they call the hollowing. It's not done in a day. It happens over time. Isolation, manipulation, suggestion, until the soul inside submits." Emily stared at the page, her throat dry. "So I'm next." "You're the last," Daniel replied grimly. "You're the only one who hasn't either disappeared, gone insane, or submitted. That's why they're afraid of you now. That's why Ryan is getting desperate." Her mind reeled back to all the strange moments over the past few months, how Greg had insisted she quit her job, how she slowly lost contact with all her friends, how even her parents had suddenly gone silent. "They've been cutting off everything that made me, she realized. Daniel nodded. "Because once they break your identity, they can insert a new one." She wanted to scream, to cry, but there was no time. "Is there a way to stop it?" she asked. "To undo it?" "There's only one way to fight back," he said. "You have to complete the ritual yourself. But not for them, for you. If you reclaim your identity, anchor it, before they finish their final phase, they can't take you. You break the cycle." "How?" Daniel pulled something from under the bed, a small black box wrapped in old velvet. Inside were ritual tools, an obsidian shard, a lock of her hair, a vial of something thick and red, and a candle made of black wax. "Tonight is the window," he said. "The cycle ends on the equinox, midnight tonight. You perform this alone. And if you hesitate, they win." A pounding knock echoed through the walls. Not her door this time, Daniel's. His eyes went wide. "They found us." Before Emily could move, Daniel shoved the box into her arms and whispered, "Room 14. End of the row. Hide there. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone, not even me. Not until the ritual is complete." "What about you?" she asked, voice shaking. Daniel smiled sadly. "Somebody has to stall them." She ran. Behind her, the door burst open and Daniel screamed. But Emily didn't look back. Emily sprinted down the motel corridor, her lungs burning and legs numb, clutching the ritual box to her chest like it was her last lifeline. Room 14 was at the far end, its chipped door barely hanging on its hinges. She fumbled with the key Daniel had slipped into her pocket just before the raid, shoved it into the lock, and threw herself inside. She slammed the door shut and pushed the heavy dresser against it, just as Daniel had instructed. Then she collapsed to the floor, her breath ragged, heart racing in her ears louder than the chaos outside. The room was small, windowless, and smelled of mildew and stale smoke, but she didn't care. She had no time to care. The clock on the wall read 11:06 p.m., less than an hour until midnight. Until the equinox. Until they completed the ritual of hollowing. Emily pulled the contents of the box onto the bed, the obsidian shard, the black candle, the lock of her hair, and the vial of blood. She grabbed the notebook Daniel had stuffed into her backpack and flipped to the page marked with a ribbon. The instructions were cryptic, handwritten, and smeared in places, but she understood enough. She had to anchor herself to her true identity. Her soul, her memories, her pain, her joy, before they could erase her. She lit the candle. A whisper touched the walls the moment the flame flickered to life. Not from outside, inside. "You don't have to do this." Emily froze. It was Greg's voice. "I'm still here. Deep down. Don't let him kill me. Don't let them win." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. Was it him? Was there a part of Greg left? Or was this just another manipulation? She gritted her teeth and followed the next step. Cut her palm with the obsidian shard and let the blood drip onto the candle flame. It hissed and flared deep blue. The whispers turned to screams. The walls rippled. She held the lock of hair in one hand, her blood-smeared palm in the other, and spoke the final incantation. Her voice shook, barely audible over the rising chaos in the room. But she didn't stop. Furniture rattled. The ceiling cracked. The floor seemed to groan beneath her feet. And then silence. A deafening, absolute silence. Emily opened her eyes. She was standing in a mirror-world version of the motel room. Everything was gray, blurred, suspended in time. Before her stood Greg, or something that looked like him, but the eyes were wrong. Hollow. Ancient. "You're too late," it said in a voice layered with a dozen others. "You were never strong enough." She took a deep breath. "I am Emily Claire Nolan, daughter of June and Mark. Teacher. Fighter. Survivor. I am not yours." She plunged the obsidian shard into the reflection's chest. It screamed, not in pain but in fury, as it crumbled into ash. When she opened her eyes, the motel room was quiet again. The candle had burned out. The clock read 12:01 a.m. She was alone, but she was free. For now.